It hurts. Hello and welcome to a car that I was previously very wrong about. I thought these things were a bit low rent, a bit dated. That was until I drove a friend's one and it completely altered my perception as to what these are like as a car. On paper, still not all that impressive, 320 or so brake horsepower, 1500 kilos, but anyone who's driven one of these at a bit of length or has owned one knows that the magic isn't found in the numbers. Now that's quite interesting because in the context of the car that we're comparing it to today, well, that very much is a car that is still impressive on paper. Now, no, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that the GTR is a natural competitor to the 370Z, and there's a lot of flies here. But aspirationally speaking, I think if you've got one of these cars, the GTR might be the next logical step. Here's the big question that I want to aim to answer today, and that is the GTR worth 3 times the value of the 370Z? Well, that's what it commands on the used market. Let's find out if it's 3 times the car. Engine-wise, although both cars share the same block spacing, almost every other component is different. Ironic, because a lot of people like to say that they are exactly the same, just with the addition of a couple of turbos on the GTR. In reality, it's different pistons, different rods, different crank, different head. Almost everything, as I say, is completely different, although you kind of expect that given that this is 320 brake horsepower and the GTR stock is 550. Now, interior wise, I think they got it just right, because at the end of the day, it is a Nissan, it ain't no Bentley, and we want our money going towards the mechanical components that contribute to the drive that we love. Although that being said, both this and the GTR I think are quite cool, quite functional, quite manga in style. Driving position, bearing in mind I've done a good few miles behind the wheel of both cars now, I'm not just saying this off the cuff having sat in it once, I think I actually prefer this. You sit a bit lower looking out over that sports car-esque bonnet and 3 pedals. Oh, 3 pedals guys, I bet a lot of you can relate to this. I look forward to driving 3 pedal cars more and more these days, you know that. So on the move, the Z's personality becomes completely clear. To me, it's not a car that wants to be driven at 10/10ths of its potential all the time. It's quite happy cruising along, and critically, it's quite enjoyable to do so. Now when you do floor it, I mean, yeah, there's enough performance there to have some fun with, but not enough that you're going to find yourself constantly getting into trouble. That's not the case on the car that we're going to feature later in the video. I still use the old V8 R8 as the yardstick as to what the perfect balance between performance and usability on the road is. This falls just a little short of that, but you can still have a lot of fun. Now, playing further into that cruiser personality that I feel the Z has is the suppleness of it. Now, not necessarily the dampers, we'll talk more about the dampers once we jump into the GTR, because it's got the added advantage of having the adaptive dampers and we can slacken them off and stiffen them and stuff, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in particular, what I'm referring to here is the suppleness of the chassis. Immediately, or almost immediately, once you get moving, you're going to notice that the Z is the much more supple car, particularly when comparing it to a slightly later GTR, the 2011 DBA onwards cars, which got a bit stiffer themselves. Yeah, again, you just notice overall that the Z is the much more relaxed car. I think that's the best way of putting it. Steering feel, now this is an interesting one, now that we're flowing around some of these little B-roads here, because it absolutely kicks the arse off of cars way, way out of its price bracket. VAG cars, I'm looking in your general direction when I say that. The steering feel is every bit as good as the GTR. However, now that I'm saying that, I'm kind of realising it's not really saying all that much, that it's every bit as good as the bigger, heavier, fatter cars steering with a front differential to compete with. Maybe that's just a testament to how good the GTR is that I'm using that as a yardstick. I'll let you guys decide that one. Begin to forget just how capable these cars can be, but as you get moving round a little B-road like this, leaning on the mighty brakes, blipping that throttle as you've rolled down the gear changes, you're reminded there's a reason that these cars are so popular. Right, memory thoroughly refreshed now on what a Z is like, I think it's time to jump into the bigger car and see how it compares. So the GTR then, how's it feel? Bloody big, to tell you the truth. You realise just how gargantuan the GTR is, driving the 370 and this back to back. There was a truck coming the other way earlier, and honest to God, I thought it was going to swipe this side of the car off. It feels lower as well. I think that's maybe just a placebo of the roof slanting a bit more than the Z. But yeah, much longer, much wider, and you really feel that in the drive. Next thing you pick up on is something that we noticed whilst behind the wheel of the Z, but getting behind the wheel of this just fully reinforces it, and that is just how taut and stiff the GTR is in comparison to the Z. Even with everything fully slackened off here, comfort mode, soft suspension setting, it's still such a taut car in comparison to the 370. That in combination with a set of turbos that are constantly on the verge of spooling makes this feel like the much more exciting, lively car, and the Z the much more relaxed cruiser. So next, it's fairly inevitable, I'm behind the wheel of a GTR after all. I'm going to talk about straight line speed. Don't worry, I'm not just going to be the millionth person ever to tell you the GTR's fast. If you're watching this, chances are you already know the GTR is pretty fast. However, what I would say is in the context of coming out of the 370Z and getting behind the wheel of this, the one performance aspect that you notice above all else is the torque. It is just laughable. Even taking the 370Z out of context, it's still an absolute torque monster. But driving the cars back to back, you really, really notice it. To try and put it into perspective for you, I reckon you could drive one of these cars on a road like this and stay below, hell, let's say 3,000 RPM and easily outrun a 370Z. That's how much difference there is. It hurts. Now here is the thing that might take you by surprise. I don't mean in just power alone, but also what I'm going to call composure. The GTR is a much easier car to drive quickly than the 370Z. Now obviously all-wheel drive is going to be playing a part in that, but as a platform I've always just felt that the GTR is so good at maintaining its composure when the power levels start to rise. I've said it before and I'll say it again, a GTR with 700 horsepower is less leery and easier to control than some cars with 400 or 500 brake horsepower. But that composure comes at a cost, and driving these cars today back to back really makes you realise that the GTR is a car that shines brightest when you're right on the edge of what's possible or legal on the roads. Dare I say it, the 370Z, in my opinion, is the more enjoyable car if you're just cruising around, pootling, going through the gears and enjoying the car for what it is. The GTR, on the other hand, it's always spurring you on for that next moment that you can bury the throttle and have the whole world in tunnel vision. You know what? I started this video by talking about how this and the 370Z were not natural rivals, and I was right in that. It would be kind of mad of Nissan to do that in their own product lineup, but I didn't really go far enough. Because in making this video, what I've learned is that this car and the 370Z are nothing alike. You hear people refer to the 370Z as a baby GTR, but in my opinion, that couldn't be further from the truth. Where that's a slightly analog cruiser, this is just an outright performance bruiser. I didn't mean that rhyme.
We began with a simple question, didn't we? Is the GTR worth 3 times that of the 370Z? Well, in a word, yes. Objectively, there isn't really a different answer I can give here. You see, it isn't that the 370Z is less of a car than the GTR. In fact, as we've learned in making this video, in some scenarios, it's actually the better car. The 370Z is still a formidable force in its respective analogue sports car category. What the added cost of the GTR gets you is that same formidable force, but not in the sports car category, the supercar category. Now thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, please do hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and we'll see you in the next video.